Hi, my name is Nicole Fern. I'm a senior hardware security engineer for Tortuga Logic. Thank you for attending this session called A Systematic Approach to Navigating the Chaos of Security. I'll begin by providing an overview of hardware security issues, along with how and when hardware vulnerabilities are introduced. Then I'll review the concept of a secure development lifecycle for hardware, along with providing some current approaches that the industry is taking to implement such a lifecycle, along with the challenges and shortcomings of these existing methodologies and tools. Then I will provide you with some guidance on how to navigate the chaos of security by using one, the Common Weakness Enumeration Database, which was recently extended to include hardware, and two, how to leverage information flow analysis for more efficient and effective security verification. So a lot can go wrong in hardware. The test and debug infrastructure is often accessible through external pins on the chip and is a very popular place for hackers to start attempting to access internals inside your device. Assets stored inside hardware include things like firmware, keys, hardware configurations, and these are typically protected by access control policies. However, things can go wrong when implementing these access control policies. For example, in the block diagram on the bottom of the slide, which shows a fairly generic SoC design, we can see that the DMA controller has access to the fuse keys. But what might not be so obvious is that any component that has access to the DMA controller also has access to the fuse keys. This is just an example of a mistake that can be made when deriving access control policies for the SoC. Additionally, you have physical attacks. These can include fault injection, clock glitching, optical reverse engineering, where the packaging will be removed from a chip and then layer by layer, the hardware design will be imaged in the hopes of extracting secrets that are baked into the structure of the hardware itself, such as keys stored in ROM. You also have side channel leakage. This includes physical side channels such as power and electromagnetic emissions, but also includes timing side channels and microarchitectural side channels. And of course, you have supply chain concerns. So this is a wide variety of security issues, but for the focus of this presentation, we'll be mainly discussing vulnerabilities that result from oversights in the security architecture or logical errors in the logical design of the hardware or software in the system. But even just limiting ourselves to digital security issues, there have been several examples of chip-level vulnerabilities that have been discovered. For example, the nail gun attack takes advantage of configuration errors in the test and debug infrastructure. Bleeding bit is a great example of why firmware security is important, and firmware is the software that is at the lowest level closest to the hardware, and the security of firmware has a great impact on the overall security of the entire system. You have Meltdown and Spectre, which have shown us that complex features added into designs for performance reasons, such as speculative execution, out-of-order execution, and caching, can often open up new avenues of attack. And last but not least, the Cisco Secure Boot hardware tampering vulnerability has shown us that if there's fundamental flaws in how you implement your root of trust architecture, then security can be broken from the earliest points in system operation as soon as the design is powered on. So we've seen from the previous slide that hardware vulnerabilities are widespread, dangerous, and costly. MITRE records an increase in hardware vulnerabilities in the past 4 years. This data is taken from the MITRE CWE database. There are several reasons for this. One is increasing design complexity. Another reason is that the return on investment for hardware attacks are high. it breaks large investments in cybersecurity, and vulnerabilities found in hardware are much harder to patch than vulnerabilities that exist purely in software. And the last reason is that there's been a shift towards hardware-based security architectures. So now the attackers are also starting to shift their focus on hardware because that is where the security is being implemented. So how and when are hardware vulnerabilities introduced? I would like to emphasize that security analysis must consider the entire system because vulnerabilities can hide in the design complexity and interactions between different system components. The block diagram on the right is there to show the number of components involved in a typical SOC, the connectiveness of these components, and also the heterogeneity that exists in a system. And this leads to an enormous amount of complexity. The security of an SOC depends on the hardware logic, but it also depends on the hardware integration and configuration of the individual IP blocks. And then, of course, how software further configures those blocks and uses hardware security features. So when you define system-level security goals, of course, no vulnerabilities should exist in the hardware implementation of the IP blocks. But even if the security requirements are met for each IP block in isolation, when you combine them together and form a larger system, there's a potential for vulnerabilities to be introduced. Some examples are improper management of the debug and test interfaces. Another example is accidentally grounding a privilege bit, or in the trust zone world, it would be called the secure bit, in a trust zone aware bus peripheral. And the effect of grounding that bit is that it upgrades the security level of every single bus request that goes into that peripheral, regardless of if the source of that request was actually in the secure world or if it was in the non-secure world. And lastly, software must correctly configure and use hardware features, especially hardware security features, because many of these features are designed to be programmable by software to increase the flexibility of the features. So some very good examples of that are memory protection units and on-chip bus access control tables. Those are completely determined by software, and software has complete control over whether a particular configuration is secure or non-secure for your particular system. So all of this has shown that the defender's job is very difficult, right? Because an attacker only has to find one of those vulnerabilities, whereas the defender's job is to analyze your design and make sure it is free of any conceivable security issues or weaknesses. And this, because of design complexity, this leads to a very chaotic landscape for the defender and for security verification in general. It can feel very ad hoc, and that there's a lack of systematic approaches to this very difficult problem. But as this quote says, we adore chaos because we love to produce order. And there have been several very positive steps and initiatives that the industry has taken to help make this problem more manageable. And that is what the remainder of the talk will dive deeper into. So the first thing I want to mention is the concept of a security development lifecycle for hardware. We've seen that security issues can arise at different stages during the traditional hardware development lifecycle. So it makes a lot of sense to address security throughout the lifecycle during each of those stages. So for example, before you even start creating RTL designs for particular blocks, you still have your general architecture and functional specification ready. And in parallel, you can be performing threat modeling and deriving your security specification. And then once you start to implement your design, you can perform block level security verification on the portions of the design that are finalized. And then after you have integrated all of those blocks together and start doing low level firmware testing, maybe using an emulation platform. You can perform system-level security verification. And so by addressing security early on and consistently throughout the development lifecycle, you're able to manage the problem better and reduce chaos and risk compared to trying to perform all of your analysis in the month before tape out. So going deeper into the three main steps of the secure development lifecycle for hardware, the first is threat modeling and security specification. This includes identifying assets, threats, and attacker capabilities. And the outcome of this process is to develop a list of requirements which must hold to mitigate the security threats. And then the primary purpose of block-level security verification is to provide assurance that the implementation at the block or IP level meets the block-level security requirements. And similarly, for system-level security verification, the goal is to provide assurance, but that the entire system post-integration, so this will likely include some software in addition to the hardware, that all of this together adheres to the security specification. So there are several current approaches to each of these stages. For threat modeling, this is largely a manual process done by security experts, but it's not enough just to have security expertise. You also have to have deep knowledge and understanding about your design's functionality, its use cases, so that you are able to determine what threats are in scope or out of scope for your particular application and the way it's being deployed. For block-level security verification, some common techniques are design review, formal verification, system or simulation-based directed negative testing, where you're thinking about illegal behavior that should not occur and writing tests to make sure that your design is not exhibiting that behavior. And then also system verilog assertions. And these techniques are largely taken from functional verification. For system-level security verification, you have architecture review, you have emulation-based software and firmware testing, and this is what is available pre-silicon. But after your chip has been fabricated and you get your first silicon samples back, you can start actually performing post-silicon penetration testing, so attacking the actual device kind of in the same manner that an attacker actually would in the real world. So, the secure development lifecycle for hardware is great, but it's currently very difficult to actually implement this in a way that is efficient. And so there's several challenges to the current approaches that industry commonly uses. The first challenge is that threat modeling and security specification are not really systematic or approachable for non-experts. The second main challenge is that specifications are written using natural language, so English sentences, while verification requires design signals. So there's a large gap that exists between the core security teams, the security architecture teams, which create the requirements, and the design verification teams that are actually responsible for analyzing the design to make sure those requirements are met. And the last challenge is that, frankly, the existing security verification strategies are inefficient. You have the manual processes of design review or architecture review, which take a tremendous amount of effort. Additionally, there's a lot of manual effort required to create directed test cases, and this is really, all of these approaches are not scalable, and they focus only on known security issues. And this really results from the fact that all of the existing tools originally target functional verification. They're not really designed to make security verification easy. That's not their primary purpose and use case. So how can we, navigate the chaos of security, address some of these challenges? The first is by using the Common Weakness Enumeration Database. So what is CWE? CWE is a list of weaknesses. These are errors, bugs, or flaws that can lead to vulnerabilities. And so CWE has been around for decades in the software domain, but not until very recently has it been extended to include a list of weaknesses that commonly occur in hardware designs. So the screenshot on the right-hand side of the slide shows the hardware view. So if you go to the MITRE website, you'll see that there's different categories, and then you can expand those and see individual weaknesses for the categories that are relevant to hardware design. And this is really exciting. Hardware CWE is rapidly growing, and you also have, it's an industry-wide effort with many different companies involved in overseeing the database and also contributing entries to the database itself. So CWE is important because it facilitates collaboration and sharing of security knowledge. It provides a common and consistent mechanism for different companies to refer to weaknesses, and this is really useful for comparing different security tools, and also provides a common language for discussing mitigation techniques. And how I see this is that the standardization of common weaknesses, it really enables future work on automation around security specification and also around design and verification for security. So for addressing challenge one, which is that threat modeling and security specification are not systematic or approachable for non-experts, we need to talk a bit more about the threat modeling process, and then we'll see how CWE can help with this process. So threat modeling produces security requirements, and to do this, you have to identify first, what are the assets in your design that you need to protect, and what are the costs or consequences if you don't adequately protect the assets. Next, you need to reason about attacker capabilities and the cost for the attacker associated with various attack strategies, and this, of course, will depend on the functionality of your design and how the ecosystem in which you deploy it and other factors. And then lastly is the calculation where you consider risk reduction of different countermeasures and mitigations versus the cost of implementing those countermeasures and mitigations. So all of this is kind of wrapped up in the threat modeling process, and what the CWE database provides is it captures expert knowledge on this and can make threat modeling a bit more approachable and systematic, especially for non-experts who are very familiar with their design, but not necessarily with security. Okay, so CWE, it can help with asset characterization because it is organized by common hardware processes and elements, so you can take a look at the database and see if any of the functional blocks match things that occur in your design, and this will give you an idea of what assets might be in your system. CWE entries also provide insight into what typically goes wrong, which helps with modeling attackers and threats. And also, the common consequences and potential mitigations are listed in every single entry. So this can help highlight common security flaws introduced when implementing defenses and help you determine what mitigation is appropriate for your design. So let's take a concrete example. This SoC is going to be a gaming console, and the asset we're considering is the key stored in fused memory. The objective is confidentiality. The threat is that this information is disclosed to an attacker. What would the attacker want to do with this information? So presumably they have purchased the gaming console, and a common goal of attackers in this case is to want to run custom software on that device. And of course, because they have purchased the device, we can assume that they have physical access to the hardware. So thinking through that and looking through the CWEs, we see there's several very relevant CWEs, such as exposure of security-sensitive fuse values during debug, and many more that are related to the debug and test interface. So in collecting all of that information, you might come up with a security requirement such as fuse values must not be readable via the JTAG debug interface. So now that you have the security requirements, you need to verify them. And information flow analysis can help you verify security requirements more efficiently and effectively than other existing approaches. So another major challenge is that specifications are written using natural language while verification requires design signals. Security requirements are always concerned with the flow of information between places in the design with different levels of trust. So information flow analysis is a very natural tool to apply to the problem of security because security requirements are centered around the concept of information flow. And so if you have a mechanism that allows you to easily express information flow requirements in the system and then verify them, that definitely helps decrease the gap, right, in converting the requirements to something that can actually be verified. And so at the heart of any information flow analysis solution, including the radix family of solutions that Tortuga Logic provides, is this no-flow operator, which enables you to uniquely treats assets as information independent of data value. Because for typical security properties like confidentiality and integrity, you're not so much concerned with the particular value of the key or the exact sequence of requests that an adversary has to send to corrupt an asset. You're just concerned about the information flow or the effect that one part of the design can have on the other. And so if you have this concept of information shall not flow from a source to a destination, this really makes the process of specifying security requirements in a way that is verifiable much easier. So a typical confidentiality requirement can be expressed as the asset should not flow to the boundary of the security perimeter, and similarly for integrity, you can easily express this as anything that is going into the security perimeter should not affect the asset. And so for the gaming console SOC, it becomes translating the security requirement to something that can be verified. All you have to do is locate in your design hierarchy where exactly this key is located, and also what are the outputs of your test and debug IP. Right, and then what information flow analysis tools let you do is just take those properties and verify them during your standard simulation and emulation flows. So while you're running your regression tests, this tool can perform information flow tracking and tell you if any of those security rules have been violated, or basically if there's any illegal flows occurring in your design. And so this really helps with addressing challenge number 3, which is that existing security verification strategies are inefficient. Information flow analysis does not require enumerating all the possible ways an illegal information flow can occur in order to detect a security violation. And that's a really important point that is critical for use cases like detecting cryptographic key leakage, because you have a very simple information flow property, such as the key should not flow to the output. It replaces a potentially infinite number of system verilog assertions, because with system verilog assertions, you really only have the values of the signals to work with, right? So you have to think of all the possible transformations the key can undergo, because even if all the key bits are inverted and then it leaks to the output, that still allows the attacker to recover the key value. So this process of having to enumerate all possible ways that an illegal flow can occur takes a lot of time and effort, and that is avoided if you use information flow analysis. And additionally, this enables you to detect unknown vulnerabilities, things that you didn't even think about beforehand, because the abstraction that the tool is operating at is the right fit for security. So it allows you to detect unknown vulnerabilities and with less effort than other approaches, because it leverages your existing verification infrastructure, which scales to system level testing. So we've covered a lot of concepts and a lot of material in this talk, but I have 3 major key takeaways. The first is that vulnerabilities can undermine the security of the entire system, that these can be introduced throughout the design lifecycle, which makes a secure development lifecycle for hardware extremely important to detect and prevent security vulnerabilities. And lastly, you can make the secure development lifecycle for hardware more efficient and effective by leveraging the CWE database and also by using information flow analysis. So thank you for your time. If you would like to learn more about how Tortuga logic can help you navigate this chaos of security, please visit our website in the link below, and I would be happy to take any questions that you have.